last but not least, Luke Egan from Aster Alliance, who is going to talk about a fair bit about the construction industry, and he has a bucket load of experience in that industry, especially helping those with the pitfalls and some of the distressed sites and things like that. And I'm sure we've all got clients, friends, some connection to the construction industry. And it's another one that's been heavily affected during this current crisis. So I'll now hand it over to Luke. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Shane. Good evening, everyone. Very informative panel so far. I'm sure everyone's taking a lot out of it. From a personal perspective, it's been brilliant. This is probably the longest period of time I've spent from my missus and the little puppy in 6 months. So yeah, it's been great. But today I'm going to give a solid overview of what's going on in the industry in the moment in relation to payments and so forth. I'm going to use some practical examples, and then post that I'm going to provide some ideas and solutions on trying to recover debts and also mitigate, find ways to mitigate payment issues arising, and giving you some practical examples on those as well. So, way of introduction, I'm the director of Aster Alliance, and our business services the property sector. It specifically has two service streams. Shane, is the slides on at the moment? Thanks, mate. The two service streams that we have is one department we deliver construction and building services. Now that could be, it's included of facilities management, building, construction, refurbishments, fit outs, new builds and maintenance. And then on the other side of our business, we have a debtor recovery side, which works with lenders, insolvency practitioners and lawyers on the recovery of property and realising those assets when in possession. To give you an example, Steve Mitchell's Oak, I'm sure he's going to have lower arrears, but if he had a property where he needed to engage lawyers and to take possession, he would engage a business like Aster to realise that asset, do a clean-up of the site, put the property on the market and effectively see it through till settlement. Today, the key section is the payment issues in the building and construction and development space, and there's four key areas that I'm going to cover off on. Next slide, please, Shane. Those sections are the paper trail for completion of works and variations, distressed developments and building sites, defects and retentions, end of lease make good clauses. So starting with number one, paper trail, I'm sure we're all aware we've had clients in the past who, with paperwork, isn't probably their priority being on building site. Now, this could be for a number of reasons. It could be poor administration on the back end. It could be a trusting relationship with a client, and paperwork is left second fiddle to any of the work that's happening. Now, the pitfalls of this administration not being put through, it can create huge issues with payment. Number one, substantiating your payment claim when coming to the point of invoicing. And number two, if all that documentation isn't in order correctly, there is little chance of recovery if you do decide to take recovery action. Next slide, please, Shane. As an example, Aster represented a client in the past. Our client delivered a building upgrade to a hospital across 12 floors. At defect stage of the project, the CEO decided the hospital wanted to install ZAP tip units on the floor's kitchenette, not standard tapware. Aster's client took instructions verbally and in good faith and installed 12 zip units at a cost of $48,000. When the payment claim was submitted, it was rejected by the hospital's finance team. Now, there's a couple of points here that we have to look at. Number one is that the contractor did not follow through with any written authority at any point. He trusted the relationship with the hospital and went off verbal instructions. Number two is at the completion of the project, the contractor we represented, didn't consult with the project manager relevant to the project. If he had have pulled the project manager aside, a work order could have been raised at that stage and the payment claim wouldn't have been rejected. Now, fortunately for this contractor, they engaged Aster to remedy the issue, and were able to work out a solution with the hospital and receive payment. But while doing that, we're able to educate the contractor about the pitfalls of not having the correct paperwork and ensuring that was to occur, whether it was a small work order, fixing a downlight, right through to building a new home. And to this point, this particular contractor hasn't had any issues in relation to payment due to ensuring that their paperwork is always in order. Second section, distressed developments and building sites. I'm sure we've all been privy over the years of sites that have had liquidity issues, or there might be some disputes between different parties on certain projects. What people need to understand is on these major projects, especially on the 5 million plus mark, whether it's civil engineering, building, there is always 6 to 10 organisations who might be involved in the payment chain of the project. Now, with this in mind, this would mean that the contractors and the subcontractors on these projects are at the bottom of the food chain, and the liquidity issues that are associated with that project would mean that payment terms would drag out further and further. Next slide, please, Shane. As a practical example, Aster was appointed on a development site for a distressed townhouse development in Chelsea. Aster was appointed by a lender to find outcomes on the following key deliverables: the progress stage of the project versus the plans, the reconciliations of payments to suppliers, and advisory on completing the project with the incumbent builder or change of builder. Now, why I've mentioned this is, in this particular example, Aster was able to ascertain the issues associated with this Chelsea project and report back to the lender on the payment issues. And pretty quickly, those issues were resolved and payments were made. This practical example can be applied for any major project. If you have a contractor or a subcontractor that you're representing, there are ways to go around in a professional manner and talk to other key stakeholders on a project. If you're, as an example, working for a builder, you might be able to consult a QS or the architect. People up that line of the chain can communicate with the right people, and a payment resolution can occur. The next section is defects and retentions. Very common in the building industry that defects are used as a tool to hold up payment. This is commonly used during a project or at the end of a project in DLP period, better known as the defect liability period. Now, a defect liability period would last for a 12-month period for a project, and it's traditionally on a tier 1 or a tier 2 site. What that also means is the retentions are held in trust until that point. Very important for building contractors and maintenance contractors alike, that if a client issues the notice to remedy defects, it's important that they remedy those in the appropriate time frame, as they will be able to substantiate any payment claim further down the track. The same applies for retentions. If a contractor can remedy any issues during the DLP period, payment should be made immediately post retention release. The fourth section, and I put this in here today because I thought it would be very important with everything going on with COVID-19, but the end of lease make good clauses. A lot of what's happening out in the market is landlords holding security bonds, and when lease breaks occur, the lease fees have to be paid out for the rent, but the make good clause is also contributed as well. In essence, at times, some landlords will use their preferred builder to put costings forward for a make good, where a make good might only cost 40,000. The preferred builder might charge 80,000. Now, if tenants don't understand their lease and the obligations in their leases and review them effectively, they can be heavily exposed for these exorbitant costs. As a practical example, Aster had a customer who was a tenant in a commercial office who broke their lease early due to expansion and was moving into a larger facility. The existing lease had 3 months remaining and a make good clause. The landlord decided to hold the 310k security bond in full with only 45k of rent owing. The landlord claimed the make good was going to cost in excess of 80k. Now, Aster was able to ascertain pretty quickly that the make good cost was roughly around 19,000, and the majority of the scope items were actually base building. We were able to consult and we were engaged and we delivered that, and the majority of the security bond was returned to our client. Next slide, please, Shane. In this section, I'm going to quickly talk about some solutions to recover debts without having to go down a legal path. First and foremost, credit checks and DD on a potential customer. This is something I've done for years personally. In the first instance, speaking to relevant subcontractors out there in the marketplace, finding out if this particular client they want to work for is paying on time, do they take deposits, has there been any liquidity issues on their projects. Further to that, you can do a formal check through Equifax or Baycorp just to tick all your boxes before working with that particular customer. Number 2, deposits and progress claims. Very important, especially in this market at the moment, is claiming deposits and progress claims as much as you can through a project. Whether it's a small or large project, the ability to claim right through will ensure that labour and material costs will be covered in the event there becomes a payment claim issue. Building permits, this is a big one. A lot of builders will sometimes, they'll see a grey area where they're having to issue a permit. I would say, especially in this market, you would always issue a permit which will ensure that you have control over the project. If there does become a payment dispute, the costs involved in changing a permit and certification of any building works is astronomical. In some cases, can be up to 50–60%. Holding that building permit gives greater control to the client and ultimately to get remedy their payment. Another good tool is using the PPSR on goods supplied. Just like purchasing a vehicle and a lender takes out a security on that vehicle, the same can be done for building trades. As an example, if you've got an electrician who's supplying $50,000 worth of downlights, you can register a PPSR on those downlights and you will have security over the lights until payment is made. External project management or quantity surveying to review a project and come back with recommendations. I touched on that with the Chelsea project development. It just gives greater clarity and opens up a lot of issues that can be resolved and to find out if both parties can move forward. The final one is substantiating a claim with SOP, which is the Securities of Payment Act. I would suggest seeking legal advice on this, but in essence, if a contractor hasn't been paid and he issues a claim under the SOP Act, endorsing SOP on his invoices, the respondent has to respond within 10 days and communicate any issues with the work, or the invoice becomes due and payable. Next slide, please, Shane. Seeking further legal action, and again, always seek legal advice. I know some great law firms on the East Coast, so if anyone wanted any recommendations in regards to that, I'm happy to share. Enforcing of SOP, and that can be done through a complaint with the VCAT or the magistrate, and issuing a statutory demand notice. And again, seek advice. Originally, statutory demand was 21 days, as Nick touched on, but is now at 6 months. So where Aster can help is in a lot of areas. Obviously, we can offer construction and building advice to clients. We're there from a banking perspective in the recoveries area. So whilst we are working for lenders, insolvency practitioners, and so forth, we can work with borrowers who may be in a little bit of trouble and they need a little bit of advice. We also have some good relationships out there, and we might be able to give them some tools to work through those issues. I hope it's been informative for you all, and good luck for the future.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Luke. Greatly appreciated. All right, that brings us to the conclusion of our webinar, and I'd like to thank all the attendees for registering and being part of it. I'd also like to thank all the panelists. One thing that a couple of thoughts I'd like to leave with is obviously one thing that Dan keeps saying is that we are all in this together, and that thing that I do agree with. We have had a health crisis that's given birth to a financial crisis, and by having larger network of people and people that you can rely upon or call who may know someone else is going to be paramount in helping businesses get through and survive this financial crisis. So we hope you found it all informative. If you've got any questions or things that you want to hear from the panelists directly, obviously make contact with whoever you know, and they can put you through to each other. We all know each other, so would love to hear from you. If you've got any other feedback, love to hear that as well. And we thank you for your attendance.